The kidnapper said if they talk to anyone, they'll kill John Bonet. And what do the Ramseys do? Not only do they immediately call 911, they don't even mention the threat or ask the police to take precautions like using unmarked cars. They also invite all their friends over and express zero regrets about doing any of that. Live interviews are the gold standard for spotting lies. So let's analyze John and Patsy Ramsey's first appearance on Larry King to see what it reveals about who actually killed John Bonet Ramsey. I'm Deception Detective, an attorney trained in statement analysis. For more like this, please hit like and subscribe. Without further ado, let's listen.
You had said recently in an interview that you were willing to take a lie detector test, and apparently the Boulder police are now saying, let's set it up. Will you do it?
We were asked, had we been asked to take a lie detector test? We said no. We were asked, would we? We said certainly we would. We would expect it to be fair, and we would expect the results to be public.
And then you would take, well, by fair, what's the determination of that, Patsy?
Well, I think it has to be someone of
national repute, FBI man,
independent, a professional polygrapher.
We've been told that this is a dangerous thing to take a lie detector test because they're subjective science. They're not allowed in court as evidence.
Agree.
In Colorado, even if both sides agree, they're not allowed in court.
In the right hands, though. That's
we have nothing to hide, and if they work, and if it will advance the cause of finding the killer of our daughter, we'll do it.
Why go on TV if they're guilty? Why not refuse the polygraph and the interview? I get this question often on my John Bonet videos, and the short answer is they did try to lay low at first. It was only once the public and newspapers started accusing them of being the murderers that they went on the offensive. In other words, they didn't do interviews like this with Larry King because they necessarily wanted to. They did it because the alternative, silence, wasn't working. In my opinion, John knows that if he ever stops pointing the finger outward, suspicion will turn right back on him. All that said, I don't think John or Patsy killed John Bonet, and I'll explain my theory the next time I pause.
Before we get to the story, to be a suspect and live with the death of a child as a suspect as well, how do you get through that?
Well, first of all, we have never been deemed suspects.
Yeah, but the public regards you.
We've been said to be under the umbrella of suspicion, whatever that means.
What's that like?
Well, it's kind of in no man's land,
Is it no win?
Well, we lost our daughter. That's the worst possible thing that could have happened to us. Anything that has happened in the aftermath pales by comparison.
Let's go back to that night. It's December 26th, the day after Christmas, right? That's when this occurred.
Mm-hmm.
You spent part of Christmas Day at your friend's house. Give us a little history. You were in what business in Boulder?
We were in the computer distribution business. We sold computer products to resellers who then sold them to users.
Very successful, right?
It was reasonably successful.
2 children?
Yeah.
2 children.
You had lost a daughter previously in a previous marriage, right?
My oldest daughter, Beth, was killed in an automobile accident in Chicago in 1992.
You've lost 2 daughters.
Lost 2 daughters, my oldest and my youngest.
If Larry hadn't brought it up, you'd be forgiven for thinking that John and Patsy only had 1 child. But they had 2, John Bonet and Burke. Strangely, they rarely mention Burke, and they often deflect when his name comes up. And I think there's a good reason for that. Here's my theory about what actually happened to John Bonet from my video, How to Spot a Half-Truth. And on this channel, we've come to the theory that the most likely scenario, based on the parents' own words, based on the stuff coming from the horse's mouth, is that Burke likely killed his sister, whether it was by accident or in a fit of rage, and then the parents, in order to protect their remaining child, covered up the crime and staged a kidnapping. And some people might say, well, couldn't they just call the police? Or maybe they didn't want their son to have the stigma of murdering his sister. Or let's say they're extremely narcissistic and only care about themselves. Maybe they just didn't want the shame of being the parents who raised a little boy who killed his sister. So the exact thoughts they might have had are irrelevant. It might sound far-fetched, but still more believable than the Ramsey's version. If you have a copy of the Deception deck, see how many red flags you can spot as they tell it. I'll show you my cards on screen as we listen.
What happened that day?
December 26th.
6th.
We were planning to leave for Charlevoix, which is, we have a summer cottage up there. We did have. We were going to rendezvous with our older kids for a first ever family Christmas all together in Michigan. We were to leave early that morning, fly to Michigan.
Morning after Christmas.
Morning after.
What happened that night? What's the first thing you remember, Patsy?
The first thing I remember is waking up, getting dressed hurriedly, going downstairs, and putting a few things together to pack to take on the plane.
It's about what time?
It's early morning, before daylight.
You're up?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Then what happens?
Then I go down the spiral staircase, and there on one of the runs of the stair is the 3-page ransom note.
And no one has entered the house, the door isn't open, you read the note.
I don't know that.
What did you do? Oh, yeah.
Well, I hurriedly read it, and didn't take long to understand what was happening. And I ran back upstairs and pushed open her bedroom door, and she was gone.
Did you think you knew it was her by the note, right?
Well, it said your daughter.
Yeah. You were not concerned about Burke? Did you check Burke?
Yes.
We checked it really quickly.
Yes.
You brought the note to John?
I don't remember. I tell you, you just, that
You
morning
remember how you got the
so
note?
chaotic.
You don't?
I don't remember exactly, but
Well, it was.
I started screaming, there's a note,
And you look in John Benet's room, she's not there. What's the first thing you do?
Royal flush, and we're just getting started. Here are the top 3 things I've noticed so far. First, Patsy told the story in present tense. When people are recalling genuine memories, they typically use past tense. Present tense usually indicates that someone's either reconstructing or inventing a made-up story on the spot. Second, there were plot holes. If they genuinely believed a dangerous intruder was in the house, why didn't they immediately check on their son, Burke? That's an obvious one, but I've pointed out many others in my video 4 words liars use, which I'll link at the end of this video. Third, there are factual inconsistencies. For example, they claim they changed clothes, but other accounts have them wearing the same outfits as the night before. Did they undress and then put the same clothes back on? It's possible, but it's suspicious either way. There are other clues too, like their use of the word started, which I've explained in previous Ramsey videos, so I won't rehash all that here. Let's keep listening.
Larry, we don't remember. This is 3 years ago. We've been through this 100
You wrote a
times.
book about it, so, I mean, you must have said...
We outlined it in the book.
Basically.
I felt like I'd been kicked by a horse. The most horrible feeling. If you ever had that pang of missing your child in a shopping center just for a moment,
Yeah.
that pain hit me squarely between the eyes, and it never left. It was a horrible feeling.
you don't know what to do first. You don't know what to do. You're just panicking.
Call the police right away?
We did.
Call the police right away.
911 or...
911.
And what do they do?
A uniformed police officer arrived relatively quickly, and I handed him the note. I said, my daughter's been taken. He said, gee, you don't think she just ran away? And I said, for heaven's sake, she's 6 years old. No, she didn't just run away.
No sign of foul play at this point.
We weren't looking. We were concerned.
I mean, there was no foul play in her room.
We
No.
didn't
Just
go
she
back
wasn't in
into
bed.
her room.
Right.
Right. She was not in.
So what did the officer do?
Asked us to go into one room, put us in one room.
And he searched the house?
I don't know.
I don't know what he did.
Don't know what he did.
Well, this is hard. When was the first time you saw your daughter? After all of this, you got the note. How long after this did you see John Benet?
I mean, when did I find her?
Yeah.
Well, I found her later that morning.
Hours?
Hours.
What were you, during those hours? You thinking she's been kidnapped?
Oh, absolutely. We thought we were dealing with a kidnapping.
Fearing the worst?
Police arrived.
Absolutely. You don't know whether you're going to see your daughter in an hour, in a day, in a year, in 10 years, or never. It's a horrible feeling.
Police combed the house?
They were everywhere.
Apparently not well,
They,
but they
I mean,
did.
they look down the basement, look everywhere there is you're supposed to look. Did they put that yellow thing they put around the house with the crime scene?
No.
Never did.
No.
What are you going through at this point?
agony.
Pure agony.
Sheer horrified terror.
Your daughter is in the hands of a monster. You don't know where. You don't know if she's cold, if she's. You just don't know. It's a horrible feeling for her.
One of the best indicators that someone's speaking the truth and speaking from personal experience is the word I. In other words, John's speaking like this is all hypothetical, and he's trying to persuade Larry King that he actually experienced it. You don't know if you're going to see your daughter again is very different than saying, I didn't know if I was ever going to see my daughter again. And there are plenty of other nuanced signs of deception like that. But I want to point out a big one which I posted about over on X not too long ago. The Ramseys say they really believed they were dealing with a kidnapper. And in that note, the kidnapper said if they talk to anyone, even a dog on the street, they'll kill John Bonet. And what do the Ramseys do? Not only do they immediately call 911, they don't even mention the threat or ask the police to take precautions like using unmarked cars. They also invite all their friends over, and in other interviews we've analyzed, express zero regrets about doing any of that. Of course, I think the reason for this plot hole is that lying is hard. If you're not actually in a situation, it's very difficult to act as though you are.
Didn't have bodyguards or...
No. We thought we lived in a safe community. It was peaceful. We thought it was crime-free. Our guard went down. We were complacent.
We'll be right back with the Ramseys. The book is just out, The Death of Innocence. We'll be taking your calls. This is Larry King Live, and they're with us for 2 nights. Don't go away. They've decided to tell their story. This is a live appearance for the Ramseys. Okay, police are there. Friends come over. What happened to Burke? Does he stay asleep, or do you wake him up and send it? What happens to Burke?
Burke was in bed. We got him up. Don't remember what time, but we had him go to a friend's house. I told him his sister was missing.
Told him the truth.
Told him the truth. We didn't try to make it as easy on as we could, but he cried immediately, so he knew something seriously was wrong, and he went to a friend's house.
And what are you doing, Patsy? You waiting for a phone call from the kidnapper? Is that what you...
Right, yes. By that time, Linda Arndt had arrived, Detective Linda Arndt, and she was introduced to me by the first officer, French, who was there. And he said, Mrs. Ramsey, if my child were missing, I would want Detective Arndt looking for her.
So she came over.
Yes.
Did the FBI get called in?
We were told the FBI was called. We kept asking, where are they? Why aren't they here? They were told, well, they're on their way. It takes a couple hours. And they, of course, they never came.
Now, the toughest part of all, John, how do you find your daughter?
I found her after Linda Arndt asked us to go through the house, look for anything out of ordinary, out of place. And I found her in the basement.
Where?
She was in a room that probably originally was a coal cellar. It was a 4 concrete walled room. I knew instantly when I opened the door that I'd found her.
You know she was dead?
No, I didn't. I had this rush of just, thank God I found her. Her hands were tied. She had tape over her mouth. I removed the tape immediately. I could feel that her skin was cool, and I feared the worst, but I still held out hope that she would be okay.
And with the police officer in the house at that time, why didn't you pick the child up, right?
Yes.
Why didn't you call a police officer to come right over and take care of her?
I mean, this is my child. I loved her.
Instinctive reaction.
Where were you, Patsy?
I was upstairs with
You
friends.
told Patsy?
I don't remember the sequence. I picked John Bonet up. I carried her upstairs.
The police officer didn't complain about that?
No.
No, because usually...
It all happened so
Listen,
fast.
If you've seen my other videos in this series, you'll know that I think the Ramseys scripted the entire kidnapping scenario and wrote the kidnapping note. I've broken both down in my video How to Analyze a Kidnapping. And the fact that Patsy continuously jumps in to explain John's state of mind like he did it instinctively, or it was just a reaction, is another indicator that they cooked up the story together. So the lack of curiosity about each other, The fact that they never took any precautions to protect Burke, even though he was just as susceptible to kidnapping as JonBenet, as well as other blatant things like the fact that they never searched the house or asked the police to come in unmarked vehicles, suggests that this is a cooked up story. So, with all these blatant big red flags, why hasn't this case been solved yet? That answer is coming up next. Listen closely.
I was going to step back and say, "Oops, I'm not going to touch this. This is a crime scene." I'd found my precious daughter, and thank God I found her.
Did you try anything to revive her?
I took the tape off her mouth. I tried to untie her arms. They were very tightly bound. I couldn't get the knot undone. And then I picked her up and I just screamed. The kind of scream you scream in a dream when you're trying to speak, but you can't. It's just a scream.
Did you see her too?
I heard him scream.
You never saw her?
Yes, I did then see her. My friends I was in the TV room and I said, what is it? What is it? And they kept, holding me. Wait, I don't know what it is. One of our friends ran into the room and said, we need an ambulance, tried to dial 911. And I kept screaming, what is it? What is it? And, then in just a couple minutes, then I walked into the living room.
What did the police say? Did they say anything? Did they?
Well, Linda Arndt was the only police person that was there that I recall.
They all had left. The others had left.
Well, I don't know. There were a lot of people there.
It was a blur to
the
you.
morning.
Yeah,
It was a blur. We had victims advocates there. We had uniformed police. We had detectives. People were in the kitchen making sandwiches. I mean, it was chaos.
People fingerprinting. There was fingerprint dust
The
everywhere.
evidence crew was there.
A little zoo-like.
It was a little zoo-like. And when I brought JonBenet up, Linda Arndt knelt over her and I guess felt for a pulse and looked at me and said, she's dead.
Did you ever think, because what can you think at a time like this, why would someone send a ransom note, kidnap someone, and then kill them and leave them in the same house?
Well,
if the purpose is to get money.
Larry, this person is a madman. It's a monster. They don't think logically.
Pedophile?
We think it was a pedophile. We think it was a male. There's several key pieces of evidence that we think will lead us to the killer. Male, pedophile. We think a stun gun was involved, so this person either had a stun gun or had access to one. The number 118 had significance to this person. 118,000 was the amount of the ransom note. That was picked for a purpose. We don't know what the purpose is. SBTC meant something to this killer. That was how the ransom note was signed. And this person was in Boulder, Colorado on December 25th. We're not looking for a needle in a haystack.
Right. If it was a pedophile, was your daughter sexually abused?
I don't believe there's conclusive evidence
know.
of that.
We don't know.
Have you talked to the medical? Did they send you the autopsy reports?
No. The police have not talked to us at all. We don't know what's been done.
Well, they've questioned you, right?
Oh, we've questioned us extensively.
But they haven't told you anything about, you have not seen a death certificate?
No.
No.
You don't know how your daughter died?
Well,
we do. She was strangled.
That's the cause of death.
That's the cause of death.
But you don't know if any sexual activity took place?
It's not clear to me that there was. We don't know. It's one of those questions you don't want to know the answer to.
When people make up a story, typically what they'll do is they'll mask the truth. So a good rule of thumb is anything that John is pointing to, if we believe he's a liar, and I do believe he's lying, is the opposite of what actually happened. For example, he pointed out that this killer might have had a stun gun, which makes me believe that any markings they attributed to a stun gun were probably from something else. John says JonBenet was strangled to death. So that leaves me to believe that it was a whack over the head that killed her, most likely from her brother Burke. As I pointed out earlier in this video, John says the killer was a pedophile. Well, that makes me believe that the killer wasn't a pedophile. And if he didn't think JonBenet was sexually abused, how could he come to that conclusion anyway? Some other things I want to point out are the fact that John and Patsy speak for the kidnapper. They do it a little bit here, but they do it a lot more in other interviews I've analyzed. And this is typical leakage. When people make up a story or invent a character, they know more than they actually should in reality. In reality, they shouldn't know anything about this person's mindset. They shouldn't know if they're a madman, what their sexual proclivities are, if there's no evidence of sexual abuse. But they know all this, I think, because they made up the character. and they can imbue any thoughts they want to him. The same way that Patsy was able to speak for John's mind state, even though she wasn't down there with him. So with all these problems, and I could keep talking for hours, in fact I actually have if you've seen my whole John Bonet playlist, why hasn't this case been solved? And the reason is the same as so many other cases in my whodunits playlist. The police bungled the investigation. Sloppy forensics lead to red herrings, and smart criminals take advantage of those red herrings and pounce on them. And when the suspect is rich enough to afford high-quality PR teams and high-quality attorneys, they can shut down dissenting voices and intimidate people into being quiet. They can also fund their own little documentaries and other forms of propaganda, which I think the Ramseys have done plenty of times, most recently with Netflix. We're about halfway through this interview, and the second half is jam-packed with content, so let's break here. If you want part 2, let me know by liking this video. On your screen now is my analysis of their Barbara Walters interview. I suggest checking out that video next. Stay true.